Welcome back to the Nerdy Grail. Now, Disney Pixar, yes, they have had some amazing movies. They've got 29 movies in total, starting in 1995 with the original Toy Story, all the way to their most recent release, which came out back in June, of Elio. So like I said, 29 movies. And in my personal opinion, I think Pixar have got quite a strong library of movies. Sure, not every film is perfect, and they do have a few duds, especially more in recent years. But I think overall they've got a pretty solid foundation. And so I thought, since the release of Elio, let's do a tier list ranking all 29 movies from Toy Story all the way to Elio, at least in my personal opinion. So sit back, relax, as I go through and rank every single Disney Pixar movie that we have had so far. Okay, and here is my tier list ranking all 29 Disney Pixar movies we've had so far from 1995 to June 2025. Now, we've got the categories here of S, A, B, C, D, and E tier, and then at the bottom, we've got NA. Now, that's because I've got to be a little bit honest with you, there is one movie on this list that I've not actually watched to its entirety, but I have seen it through clips, I've seen it through trailers, I've seen reviews, so I know about it. So I'm just going to give like an overall opinion of it, but it will go into that category. And then when we've had a few more Pixar films in the far future, then I'll be able to do a proper ranking with it involved then. But for now, I have seen all of the other 28 movies, and so that is what we will be ranking. But I will also talk about the 29th movie as well. So without any further ado, let's jump straight in, starting with Toy Story 1, which I think, despite it being from the mid-90s, some people might saying it's a bit dated, I think it is still a solid foundation for a franchise going forward. I think Toy Story 1 is fantastic, seeing the relationship start to bloom between Woody and Buzz, obviously not getting on, Buzz being a bit delusional, thinking he's still a toy, and Woody trying to Buzz thinking that he's a space ranger, and Woody trying to convince him that he's actually a toy, I think is done really, really nicely for good comedic effect. I think Sid as the antagonist, where they go to the next door neighbor and see the twisted stuff he does with his toys, I think is done really, really well. The musical score is brilliant. Visually, for the time, it was stunning, and I really, really like it. I also love the chase scene where they're chasing the moving truck strapped to the rocket. I think it's all done really well. Not quite S tier, but is definitely a solid A tier Pixar film. Then we got A Bug's Life, which for me personally is quite mid. It's a C tier. I should really say what these tiers are. So S is obviously the best, A is great, B is good, C is okay, D is bad, E is terrible. But so I think for me, A Bug's Life is pretty mid. I like what they were trying to do, but I just, there's something about A Bug's Life that doesn't really connect with me per se. It's not really one that I've gone back to rewatch an awful lot. The characters don't really stick with me. The visuals, for me anyway, just seem a little bit off. I'm just not a huge fan of it, if I'm honest. I think maybe it deserves a bit more of a rewatch for me. But it's okay. It's not terrible, but it's nothing spectacular. Toy Story 2. Now, for me, Toy Story 2 is the first S tier on this list. Toy Story 2, for me, is my favourite Toy Story movie, so I'm going to say that right off the gate. I know we still got 2 more to go. Toy Story 2 is the best Toy Story, in my opinion. The relationship between Woody and Buzz has a good foundation now. Woody gets taken by a collector accidentally in a garage sale, and Buzz and the gang have to go and try and save him before he's shipped off to a museum, and you get to introduce the characters like Bullseye and Jessie, who are fantastic additions to the cast. It's done really, really well. You don't just have like 1 or 2 locations. They go all across the city. They go into a toy shop. They go into an apartment building. You have the big confrontation at the airport as well, which is really, really good. The antagonist of Stinky Pete, the secret antagonist, the twist antagonist, even though we all saw it coming, in my opinion anyway, was really, really good. And I just thought it was a fun movie, getting to see Woody connect with a potential new family, but still, thinking he's Andy's toy and needs to get back to Andy. I thought it was all nice. Getting to hear Jessie's backstory as well, as heartbreaking as it was beautiful. And I'm just so glad that she joined the crew as well. Fantastic movie. I've watched it tons and tons. So for me, easily S tier. But that's more of a personal opinion for me. Then we have got Monsters, Inc. I love Monsters, Inc. I can't deny it. Monsters, Inc. is another one of those, I don't want to say guilty pleasure, because it's not, because Monsters, Inc. is just a bit of fun. The characters of Mike and Sully are brilliant. This whole universe of monsters who their city and their planet thrives by going through these doors to the human world, scaring children, collecting their screams, and using that to give them power and electricity. I think it's an interesting concept, but yet secretly the monsters themselves are scared of the humans, because when Boo comes through the door by accident into their world, they're all terrified of the havoc she could cause, and all that. Randall as a villain, really sneaky and slimy. Love him. The visuals, how they turn ordinary things monster-like the cars and the buildings and the food they eat. Really, really done well. I just think it's a great idea and a great setting for a movie. So easily A tier standard movie. I love it, and I know it's quite a popular one, but in my opinion, it deserves the recognition that it gets. Finding Nemo. For me, this is a decent movie, but I would say this is probably, at least for me, a B tier movie. I know some people might be like, oh, what? This is like A and S tier, surely. It is good, don't get me wrong. It's great. The father-son bond between Marlin and Nemo. He's going on a search for his last son, who's the sole survivor of a vicious attack at the start, which was heartbreaking, might I add. Marlon losing his wife and losing all his kids bar one, who there was a little crack in the egg, and so he grows up with a little deformed Finn, which is a lot smaller than the others, so he struggles in terms of making friends and in terms of swimming. I thought it was sad, but it was also really sweet and touching, and seeing the lengths that Marlon would go to protect his son was amazing. And bumping into Dory, fantastic character. Love the character of Dory. Traveling the lengths of the ocean, bumping into sharks and jellyfish and turtles and all sorts, to get to the shore in order to save his son. And then on Nemo's side, where he's been taken by these divers, put into a fish tank in a dentistry office, and who's going to get sold on to the dentist's daughter, who's apparently not very good at looking after fish. So there's a bit of a ticking clock there, is also done really, really well. And I think just all the characters that they've got is really good. I just think that there's times where it's a little bit too dark for a Pixar film, or the pacing does drag in areas. Like, some things are done well, some things are not done as well, if I'm being honest. And I think once they saved Nemo and then there's a little bit more of a confrontation, I think that drags a little bit too much. They didn't need that additional thing. You should have just found Nemo and then happy days, but that's just my opinion anyway. The Incredibles. Incredibles is also going up in S tier. The Incredibles is a fantastic Pixar movie. I love superheroes, I love Marvel and DC and all that. But it's not just the fact that I love superheroes that connects me to The Incredibles. It's the plot. It's all the family of characters. Dash and Violet. All of them are good. Jack, Bob, Mr. Incredible, Mrs. Incredible. The villain of Syndrome is fantastic, who used to be someone who idolized Mr. Incredible. And then Mr. Incredible one day on one of his missions, when he met this so-called fan and fanatic person, said he didn't need his help. And so he spent all his childhood trying to think of ways to get Mr. Incredible to recognize him and seek revenge, and then grows up to be this mad supervillain that wants to be the only superhero. I think is done really, really well. The family bond with all the characters, of how Bob has to try and choose between his domestic life and his superhero life. Getting to see the variety and the powers, Violet's invisibility and the ability to create force fields, Dash with his super speed, them thinking that Jack doesn't actually have any powers, but then towards the end of the movie actually gains his powers, is really well. Mrs. Incredible with her ability to stretch like Mr. Fantastic, and Bob obviously being super strong, and coming to the realization that he's only strong when he has his family, I think is done really, really well. Really good messaging in this movie, really colourful, and great use of locations as well. And also Edna, the person who creates the super suits, one of the best characters ever written. She is hilarious. She's brilliant. Love her. Fantastic movie. If you're going to see one Pixar movie, go and see The Incredibles. It's really good. Cars 1. Cars 1, I feel about the same as I do with Finding Nemo. I think Cars 1 was an interesting idea. Gives me it's like Monsters Inc., but now do it with cars. You've got the world as we know it. You've got all the locations of the world. So if you go to France, you've got the Eiffel Tower. Go to New York, Empire State Building. All this, that, and the other. Everything's normal, but it's all run by cars. There's no humans, which I always found a bit strange. My brain was almost like, how do these cars build things realistically? How did they make themselves? How does that work? But it was really, really interesting to see that. And it follows Lightning McQueen, this super fast sports car who, is trying to win what's known as the Piston Cup, to be the greatest racer of all time. He's up there, but he wants to be the greatest. On his travels between courses, he gets lost in this little makeshift town in the middle of nowhere, and has to repair the town that he destroys by accident, and then starts connecting with the folk around there, and starts to become a bit more humbled. He grows a bit more because he's got a big ego, and he thinks nothing of them, but then grows to love them and love the location. So it's really, really nice, and I love the character of Mater as well. Mater's a fun little character. Sally's also good. You've got Doc as well. There's lots of great characters in this, and I'd say Lightning McQueen is an interesting character. I like what they do with the first movie. How he needs to be mentored by someone else to become a better person. And that comes full circle by the time you get to the third Cars. Ratatouille for me is A tier. I like Ratatouille. I know some people are not a massive fan of Ratatouille, but for me, I think it's quite sweet. This rat called Remy who has this passion for food and passion to cook and wants to create new things, doesn't want to scavenge like the rest of his family, wants to achieve something better, gets separated from his family and ends up in Paris, where he bumps into a long descendant, or I think a son of a famous restaurant owner, Gusteau, who's just a cleaner. He's not really taken seriously, and looks upon him, feels sorry for him, and thinks if we team up, maybe we could become the best chef in the world, because I can't be seen because I'm a rat. You don't have the talent, but I've got the talent. So they team up and start to become great cooks in the family restaurant, which makes it better, which grabs the attention of restaurant critics who come to investigate. Meanwhile, the head chef there at the time is suspicious of his rise to glory and doesn't believe that he's a true proper chef, and suspects that there's something more at play. But I love the way that they do it. It makes no sense, okay? It makes no sense. A rat's under a hat and starts pulling a guy's hair, and he's able to control every limb in his body and do all sorts of things. It's crazy, but it's fun, and I love the music. I love the setting of Paris. I think it is superb, and yeah, it's just a great movie. Check it out. WALL-E. WALL-E for me is S tier. I adore WALL-E. WALL-E debatably could be my favourite Pixar movie. It was actually, at the time I could have seen others in the cinema, but WALL-E was actually the first Pixar film that I went to the cinema to watch, and I loved every moment of it. It's a film that for the first half, there's no talking apart from just a couple of sounds, a couple of, you got Wally and Eve who say their name like Pokemon, really, but there's very little communication in it. And then when they go up into space to and discover the colony of humans who are living out up there, then there's obviously more talking. But it's basically this apocalyptic world. The world has gone to crap, filled with, it's like an apocalyptic world full of dirt and dust, and it's not very habitable. So the humans get shipped off into space to come back when the planet's more habitable. Wally, a cleanup crew robot, discovers a plant And then Eve, a little shuttle robot sent by the colony, comes down, discovers the plant, and takes them up to the spaceship to be like, look, you can go back home now, it's fine. And then it takes place on the spaceship where you see the humans have gotten quite fat because they become quite dependent on the computer systems and they're quite lazy, they can't walk. It's really interesting, the concepts, and we find out that the ship's AI system is starting to take over, doesn't want them to go back to Earth. So it is really, really interesting, and I quite like it, to be fair. I love it when they're on the spaceship as well. And I love the little romance between Wally and Eve. Think it's so sweet and so cute. It's brilliant. Please watch Wall-E. Such a good movie. Up. I quite like Up. I'm just trying to think whether I think it's B tier or A tier. I think for me, I'm going to be fair. I'd say it is probably A tier. It could go into B tier depending on my mood. But it is just a sweet, sweet movie. I said early Pixar is fantastic. Early Pixar's got so many hits. But I adore Up. You know, the first 5 minutes where you're introduced to your core character who's going through the loss of his wife, but you get to see how he met her, what they grew up to do. It's done in a little musical montage, and it's so sad. It really hits you. I remember tearing up watching it, and it was sad. But she had a dream that she wished that their house could be situated on top of this falls, and it was their dream to always go there. And so he makes it his life goal to take the house there one day. Really crazy. They put balloons, hundreds and hundreds of balloons, which somehow lifts the house up and takes them to the location. But you get this whole other subplot, this other adventure that goes on. Doug, the talking dog, I think is hilarious. Love the talking dog. The whole gag of squirrels and they get distracted is brilliant. It's a fun movie. Look, it's a fun movie. I can't deny it's a fun movie. It is a fun one. It's very sad though, very emotional. Really hits you here. But yeah, A tier, B tier, it can switch for me. But yeah, I can see why people would put it A tier. And to be fair, I would too overall. Toy Story 3 though is definitely A tier worthy. Toy Story 3 is solid, and let's be real, Toy Story 3 is where the franchise should have ended. The fact that we got Toy Story 4 and Toy Story 5 on the way, I think is absolutely ridiculous. Toy Story 3 was the perfect end to the Toy Story franchise. You finally got Andy, who's grown up and is going to college. He doesn't need his toys anymore. And so the toys end up going to this daycare nursery place, and where they can still be played with. But Andy did want to take Woody with him to college because he was one of his first and his most treasured toy. But they end up meeting, the toys at the daycare. You end up meeting one of the best antagonists ever in Lotso, who smells of strawberries. Who's this kind, old, wise bear who runs the daycare for the toys. But actually he turns out to be quite a sinister character who keeps the toys under lock and key and is ruling the nursery daycare place and won't let them leave because he doesn't want to be put into the child zone with all what he calls the feral children who don't know how to handle the toys. He wants to stay in with the older children who knows how to handle the toys and lets Woody and all go to the dogs, basically. And it's all about them trying to escape the daycare and get back to Andy before he heads off to college. It is done perfectly, and the story ends with Andy finally realising he doesn't need his toys, including Woody, and gives them to the new person who they met through the film, Bonnie, this little girl who has grown a relationship to these toys through the daycare and through Woody actually ending up at her house at one point and wants to play with them, and Andy realising that they'll get played with more with her. And so you get to watch Andy go off into the sunset in his car to college, and the toys look on saying, "So long, partner." Perfect ending. Didn't need to continue the franchise from there, but they do. They could have done it in little shorts, which they did for the time being. Didn't need to make another movie. But hey-ho. Cars 2. Right, look, Cars 2, I'm going to put down here. Cars 2, yes. Cars 2 is a bad movie. Okay, it is a bad movie, especially compared to the other Cars movies. It is a bad movie. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but the reason I put it in bad is I think it's so bad it's good. because it's such a departure from what Cars was supposed to be. It's all about Mater basically becoming a secret agent. It is really weird and random. Lightning McQueen's going on this world tour, and Mater follows him along, but gets entangled in this like weird Johnny English style crime organization where there's these secret British agents who are hunting down this evil organization that's trying to like destroy the world and take over, and it's really weird. It makes no sense, but in a funny way, which is why I can't say it's terrible, but it is a bad movie. It was a bit of a downfall for Pixar. This is going to be a bit of a controversial one. I also, please don't hate me for this, but I'm also not a fan of Brave. I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of Brave. Don't get me wrong, the setting and the music, beautiful. Love it, fantastic. I think when it comes to Disney, very rarely do their music, is the music bad, But I'm just not a fan of the characters, and I'm not a fan of the plot. The whole turning your mother into a bear thing. Obviously you've got Merida, who doesn't have a good relationship with her mother. She's forced into like dating and marrying someone else for the good of the kingdom, that sort of thing. And so she then clashes with her mother, and so makes an accidental wish and her mother turns into a bear, and if she doesn't turn her back by a certain time, she'll stay a bear forever. And so she grows, through her journey to restore her mother, she has to try and she builds a better relationship with her mum, and by the end of the movie, they've grown a deeper bond, and that's that sort of thing. It's nice, don't get me wrong, but it's very generic, and it drags like no tomorrow. I'm just not a huge fan of it. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to get a bit of slack for that, but I can't help it. I just not a big fan of Brave. Monsters University is not as strong as Monsters Inc., but I would say it is definitely a B-tier worthy movie. It is fun. You go back in time to how Mike and Sully first met. Mike ends up in Monsters University in this on campus trying to learn how to be a good scarer. Mike is more of a nerdy, geeky person who's all about studying, and Sully is more, it's your typical cool kid, shall we say. He's a Sullivan, and so feels like he doesn't need to try, so to speak, but obviously encounters Mike. They sort of get forced together, and so they sort of change each other for the better. And I think that's quite nice. And I like the campus setting. I think it's done well. They do a little scare competition in order to try and be the best scarer. I think it's done quite well. You actually get to see the actual corporation that they're planning on working on in the future, so the building from the first movie. It is nice, and it does all come full circle, and by the end of the movie, they do end up working together at Monsters Inc., where you then get to carry on then in the first movie. So it does tie it together really, really well. And all the sub-characters as well that they meet on the campus grounds, really, really nice. Quite like it, bit of fun. Not as good as the first movie though, but hey-ho. Inside Out. Wow. Inside Out for me, is definitely an A-tier worthy movie. Inside Out 1 is a very, very good movie. I can't deny. Very solid movie. Joy, anger, sadness, fear, disgust. They are, some core emotions that you would have from a young age. And that's what this is all about. It's about the early years of childhood and how to cope and deal with stresses and fears and that sort of thing. And it's all about Joy, who thinks that the child needs to be happy all the time, because if you're sad, then it's a bad thing. But you need sadness sometimes. And it's all about Joy and sadness trying to work together, and Joy realising that it's okay to be sad sometimes. And I think that's done really, really well. It's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Love it. They have this little control room as well, where they control all the emotions, and then behind them they got other worlds. And obviously Joy and sadness get taken out of the control room and have to make their way back. Like I said, discovering that you need sadness and you need joy together. You can't have one and not have the other. Beautifully done. Beautiful score and a beautiful premise for a movie. Very, very nice. The Good Dinosaur. It took me ages to watch The Good Dinosaur. I literally have only watched it in the last 2 years. For me, though, it's very mid. It's a very mid tier movie, a bit like Bug's Life. I watched it and I thought, I don't really know whether I really like this movie or not, if I'm perfectly honest. It's okay. It gives me vibes of Little Mermaid, of Finding Nemo. You know, like, because you've got like the eggs of all the dinosaurs that are hatching, and he was like a bit of a late developer. He's a smaller one. He's a bit more fragile and shy, and then gets separated from his family, bumps into this human, and it's all about trying to find their way home. It is literally like Finding Nemo, but dinosaur edition, and they sort of build a bond together, the dinosaur and the kid, and get more brave together and tackle, you know, dangers together. Very sweet, very nice, but for me, it's just basically a diet version of what Finding Nemo was. It's alright, don't get me wrong, it's not terrible, which is why I think it's mid, but for me anyway, not a huge fan of The Good Dinosaur. Finding Dory as well, I also think is mid. Some people might disagree with me on that, and that's fine. For me, Finding Dory is, well, it is just a repeat of Finding Nemo, but replace Nemo with Dory. Yes, it's nice, you get to have some more backstory with Dory, how Dory became who she was. You got some touching moments with her getting separated from her family, and people having to, and then you got Marlin and Nemo having to find Dory because she's taken to this like zoo area, this aquatic zoo place, and they have to try and rescue her. It's nice, but it feels very rinse and repeat, and not necessarily in the best way, if I'm perfectly honest. I don't mind it, don't get me wrong, but I do slightly prefer the original to the sequel, if I'm honest. Then you've got Cars 3. I have an unpopular opinion. Well, I don't know if it's really unpopular opinion, but what I'm going to say is I actually think Cars 3 is probably about as good as Cars 1. I would say it's quite nice because it then comes full circle on the opposite end of the spectrum. So the first one is obviously Lightning McQueen is sort of this top racer, and is having to learn to be humble and gets mentored, and by the end of the movie he becomes the big racer that he wanted to be. Whereas in the third one, he's coming to the end of his career, he's struggling to cope that he's not as good as the new racers that are coming in, and so gets left behind, left in the dust. He becomes the people that he was mocking at the start of the first movie, and then finds that he then becomes the mentor of another racer who's going to challenge the new racers, and so becomes the Doc from the first movie, and ends up still getting to be part of the racing community, but now he gets to be the mentor on the side, you know, calling the shots, that sort of thing. And it does come full circle, and it's really beautiful and nice. Is the plot really good? No. Is the pacing off at times? Yes. But the reason I put in B tier, technically could be C tier, is just because it does come full circle for me. It caps off what the first movie started, and I think it does it in a nice way. It might be an unpopular opinion because I know some people don't really like Cars 3, but I quite like it, to be honest. Coco. Coco's beautiful. Coco's a beautiful movie. Definitely A tier worthy. You know, like I said, this Festival of the Dead, you know, getting to speak, communicate, thinking about loved ones, using music to help communicate that, I think is done really, really well. The visuals of the, like, the dead world, you know, where it all ends up, I think is beautiful. It is lovely. Is the villain really a twist? Yeah, you could kind of see where it was going right from the get-go. I sort of called it when I was watching it instantly. I knew this wasn't going to be a twist. This was going to be how it is. So it's a very predictable movie, but it is a beautiful movie, and I'd highly recommend watching it. The Incredibles 2. Oh, if Incredibles 1 was S tier, this one is going down into C tier. Now, I know some people might put it lower than C tier, but I don't think it's quite that bad. And the reason I say that is because half of the movie is good, the other half is terrible. The stuff with Mrs. Incredible trying to be the lead superhero is not done very well, mainly because they've got a poor villain in the Screenslaver, I think his name is, the Screenslaver. He's nowhere near as good as Syndrome. It was very predictable who the villain was going to be as well. They tried to make it a twist, and it wasn't a twist. At least with Incredibles, they didn't try and hide who the villain was going to be. You knew who it was going to be, but they did it in a good way, you know, whereas this one they tried to hide it, and it was very obvious, and it was done poorly. You know, and I'm sorry, but Mrs. Incredible can't hold the movie on her own. She needs her family. Just like Mr. Incredible, to be fair, can't hold the movie on his own in the first one. It's the other family's involvement that helps. But they tried to make Mrs. Incredible the only one, and it didn't work, if I'm honest. They even gave us some other superheroes to work with, and they were just useless. The stuff that works in this movie is the stuff with Mr. Incredible trying to be a dad. Him with Violet, Dash, and Jack Jack is every scene they're in is fantastic. I love Bob trying to help Dash with his homework, try to deal with boyfriend problems with Violet. I think that is fantastic. Trying to deal with Jack Jack's powers emerging is brilliant. I love it, and it is so wholesome. It is amazing. I love all that, and that's what saves it from being bad or terrible, is those scenes. If you take those scenes out, this could easily be D or E tier. But I think Incredibles 2, yeah, compared to the first one, is nowhere near as good, if I'm being honest. Toy Story 4. Toy Story 4. Oh, oh, Toy Story 4. Yeah. You know, it's yeah, Toy Story 4 is bad. Toy Story 4 is bad compared to the other Toy Stories. Look, I know some people will probably say, why have you, it's not that bad, you know, could at least put it in mid. I can't, because if I'm being honest, this movie shouldn't exist. It shouldn't exist. Toy Story 3 was the perfect end to the franchise. Toy Story 4 is just insulting. It's just insulting to the franchise, and it's more insulting knowing that we've got a fifth movie, which will also probably make this movie even more irrelevant than it already is, you know? So I'm not a fan of Toy Story 4. Visually, it's good. Forky is an interesting character. I like Forky. Everything else, apart from the visuals and Forky, and I guess Bunny and Duck are okay as well. But apart from that, everything else is terrible. The whole plot is ridiculous, and the ending is by far the most insulting thing I have ever seen. You know, debatably, I might even put Toy Story 4 even lower on this list. When I get to the end of this list, I'll see. But Woody would not abandon his child. That was the core aspect of Woody. He wouldn't abandon Andy, and he wouldn't now abandon Bonnie. Yes, Bonnie is not playing with Woody as much, but so was Andy. And Woody wasn't going to abandon Andy when he was going to college, and knew that he wasn't going to get played with as much in college, so why is he going to abandon Bonnie? You know, it is so against Woody's principles that he built up over the past 3 movies that it's almost like they didn't know who Woody was as a character. Buzz is insultingly stupid in this movie. Like, yes, Buzz has never been the smartest, but he was not this levels of dumb. Like, really stupid. I don't know if what happened to him at the end of Toy Story 3 really did affect him, but Buzz is an idiot in this movie. Like, an idiot. You know, Bo Peep. Bo Peep wasn't in the third movie. She was in the second movie, and she's now come back, and she's now this super tough, you know, independent, you know, I knew what they were trying to go for here, you know, she wasn't the fragile Bo Peep that you know, she had to grow up, you know, and toughen up, so to speak, which is nice, I like it, good development, but was it needed for the story? Not really, and she wasn't the same Bo Peep, she was definitely not the same Bo Peep that Woody liked, so I didn't agree with any of that. The villain was alright, I suppose. Very Goosebumps, actually, to be perfectly honest. Especially with the wooden dummies, you know, with the suits and the bow tie. Yeah, very, very Goosebumps. Yeah, the stakes weren't there in this movie, if I'm honest. The stakes weren't there, they weren't as strong. A weak villain, very skewed moral dilemma for Woody, terrible ending. Terrible plot. No, I'm not a fan of it. Sorry, it's just not for me. Some people might like it. I can't connect with it. Onward, for me, was also kind of mid. Yeah, it was okay. You know, very sweet message, very sweet plot line, you know. Weird casting choices of Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, might I add. I don't know really why they had to do that apart from just getting big names in it, but You know, very sweet that the one son, you know, was desperate to see his dad again. Never got the chance to, and all through the movie, it's all about him, you know, being able to. There's a way that he can see his dad again, and he'll stop at nothing to do it. And by the end, you know, the end of the movie is. I'm going to try not to spoil it for people, but the end of the movie is not what you would expect it to be. And I think that's sort of what disappoints me a little bit. The visuals were nice. Like I said, I liked the story. But for me, just it didn't grab me. It didn't fully grab my attention, which is why for me it's very mid. Soul, I actually didn't mind. I actually thought Soul was a fairly decent movie. Not quite A or S tier worthy for me, but I thought it was quite nice. You know, about this guy he's finally gonna get his big break, you know, on the jazz scene, you know, but ends up accidentally falling down a sewer drain and ends up dying, and potentially he's fighting for his life, and his soul is about to pass over into the afterlife, and you know he sort of is desperate to get back, you know, and along the way meets another soul who also wants a second chance at life, and sort of they build this nice bond together. It's very, very sweet. I was quite touched. It took me a couple of viewings to watch Soul, because I started watching it, then I stopped, and then I went back to watch the start again, and then managed to watch all the way through. It is quite a sweet movie, I must admit. But yeah, not quite A or S tier worthy for me, but it is definitely a decent movie. Luca, yeah, Luca. Again, I feel the same way with Luca as I do with Onward. It's nothing amazing. Yeah, it was a 7 or nothing movie, and the whole like subplot of them desperate to win this competition, this race, so that they could have a Vespa as well. Because let's be real, that's like the underlying plot really here, the secondary plot thing of getting a Vespa. I think the writers and everything must have been crazy at the time of doing this. Again, visually brilliant, music brilliant. I just think that the plot and everything else just sort of falls apart, and the pacing is just weird, and I don't really connect with these characters either. That's the main problem I have. It's just difficult to connect with these characters. It's very mid. You can watch it and not be insulted by it, but let's be real, it's not the best movie. Turning Red. Now this one for me, right? Look, I know there's lots of people that aren't a fan of Turning Red. And then there's lots that think it's fantastic. I actually surprisingly didn't mind Turning Red. So I'm going to put it up in B tier. I honestly didn't mind it anywhere near as much as other people thought of how that potentially bad Turning Red was. Nice, fun little concept, you know. This girl, this lineage of females who can turn into like these pandas as almost like a defense mechanism. The males don't, only the females do. The underlying themes of womanhood, shall we say. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you've watched Turning Red or heard anything about Turning Red, you know what I mean when I say the underlying themes of womanhood. They go into that in detail. I remember that caused some controversy or whatever at the time. I'm like, that sort of thing doesn't need to be in our kids' movie. I mean, come on. At this point, the kids who are watching it are coming to that age for those things to happen. It's interesting. You know, and you really get to connect with Mei Mei as a girl growing up. You know, she's into boys. You know, she wants to be more respected by her parents. She wants to be more independent. She wants to be trusted more. I like all that, and I love the mother's struggle with letting her little girl grow and needing to be more independent. I like all that, and I think it's done really, really well. And again, visually, really nice and really nice ideas. I can give it some slack. Lightyear. Yeah, let's be real here. Lightyear's not good. Let's be real. Let's not beat around the bush. The only thing that saves Lightyear from being in E tier for me is the fact that I love socks. I need to specify this now. The cat called Socks, SOX, I think they spell it. The cat's brilliant. I love the cat. The cat's fun. You know, especially in the scene where Buzz is about to go to sleep and he's just sat there and he's just like, you know, I can help you sleep if you like. And he gives him some options. He's like, whale calls? I like that. He's like, I'll just do some white noise. And he's like, shh. I like the cat. Socks is the only thing that saves us. The twist that Buzz is actually Zurg, nah, just delete yourself. Delete yourself, get rid of that. Terrible. Absolute garbage. It was both predictable, but also not what we needed in this movie. It destroyed the movie. And yeah, just no. Awful. And to think that this is supposed to be the movie that Andy was watching, which made him want to buy a Buzz Lightyear action figure in the first movie, I don't know. Nothing against Chris Evans, because Chris Evans does the voice of Buzz in this movie as opposed to Tim Allen. Would have been interesting to see Tim Allen do this, but nothing against Chris Evans. But yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Elemental, yeah, Elemental's all right. Elemental for me is also mid. I don't mind it, but it's not anything spectacular. I like, they're basically like a Romeo and Juliet style story here. You've got the water one, it's all the different like elements. You've got water, you've got air, you've got fire, you've got ground and earth. You've got all these little elements together, and they have different sections of the city, but the fire element is seen as like, if you want to call it like the lower class, the poor one, the one that needs to be avoided and dangerous, because it just, for people, calls it destruction. And the water element is seen as like more the higher class, the more fancier one, that brings more life and stuff like that. It's seen as more higher up. And so you basically got a fire and a water element that are bonding together, and they're not supposed to be, and it is sort of this love story that goes on. The characters of Ember and Wade are okay. I do actually lean more with Ember than I do with Wade, but Wade is alright. It's okay. It's okay. Visually, it's really nice. I love seeing all the different elements, especially like air and earth and all that sort of thing. The thing is beautiful. It's very Zootopia, stroke Zootropolis style city as well. I really get that vibe, and I got that vibe when I was watching it. It's okay. Inside Out 2. I adore Inside Out 2. I debatably prefer Inside Out 2 over Inside Out 1. And that's, not common for me. Apart from Toy Story 2, as you can see, I mostly prefer the originals over sequels. I very rarely prefer a sequel over an original. But Inside Out 2 had everything that Inside Out 1 had, but then added more to it. Especially the new emotions of like anxiety, ennui, embarrassment, envy. I thought they were really, really good. Anxiety, if you've gone back and you've watched like my unboxing of the Inside Out 2 Steelbook and stuff like that, and I talked in like my rating all the movies from 2024, if you know my thoughts on anxiety as a character, and I love it. And it's great because it progresses Riley from being the child to being like this teenage girl, who's going through those things, who will start to get embarrassment when talking to boys or when trying to become a popular girl, will envy like the popular people, will get anxiety if they mess up, It really plays on all that and does that in such a good way, and then still to mix it with your original emotions of joy, sadness, anger, fear, all those. Really, really good. I will say that envy and disgust sort of feel very similar, but, overall, I think Inside Out 2 is perfect, if I'm honest. Right. So now we're moving on to Elio. So Elio is actually the movie that I'm going to have to put down here, because I have not actually officially gone to the cinema to watch Elio. I have seen clips, I have seen all the trailers, and I've seen a ton of reviews of Elio. So I can sort of give like a rough opinion on it, on where I'd think it would be. I think if I was to put it on the tier list, it would probably be C. It would probably be C tier, mid. The plot line of this kid who wants to be abducted by aliens. He feels he doesn't belong. He feels that there's something not right. you know, and eventually does get abducted by aliens and gets mistaken for this like Earth ambassador and starts connecting with all the different species and has to help defend the Earth and stuff. Look, it's very sweet. Don't get me wrong. I see what they're trying to go for here. But apart from, again, and I've said this a lot with the lower tier ones, apart from how visually beautiful it looks, and the musical score is quite nice, there's no real substance to the movie. I just feel like lately Disney and Pixar are struggling with creating original content. I think they seem to be, you know, better at the moment when they do the sequels, for the most part, ignoring Toy Story 4 and Incredibles 2. But yeah, Inside Out 2 is, you know, shows that they can still do sequels. But I feel like they struggle with their original content a little bit still. And I think that's clear with Elio. So I would say mid-tier for Elio, if I'm honest. But eventually I will watch it properly. And when I come back and revisit this ranking, potentially in the future, once we've had at least another 4 or 5 movies come out, I'll be able to give a bit more of an updated thought on Elio as a film. But that is going to be my tier list for ranking all 29 Disney Pixar films. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please like it by giving it a thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts on the Disney Pixar films. What are your favourites? What are your least favourites? Let me know in the comments down below. And subscribe if you are new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you've had an amazing day, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now, everyone.